again. It's good to be with you all. Here's another story from the New Testament part of our Bible about when Jesus was on earth here, when he did lots of special things and people could see and hear him. Today we're going to hear some of the things he did towards the end of his life, when he knew it was nearly time for him to go back to his Father in heaven. Jesus and his disciples were one day on their way to a big city called Jerusalem, where there was a big place that people went to worship God. The building was called Temple. Do you remember we heard a story once about when Jesus visited the temple with Mary and Joseph, and they thought he was lost and they couldn't find him, and he was there all the time learning more about God. Today's story is about when Jesus was grown up, as I said, and he was now a man and was going with his friends to Jerusalem. But he didn't want to walk into Jerusalem, he wanted to go in a different way. So when they were nearly there, he asked that a young donkey be brought to him from where he knew the owner was waiting ready. The owner knew that Jesus was going to ask, and he had the donkey all ready. It was a young donkey that they called a colt. When the donkey arrived, Jesus climbed on. The donkey had never been ridden before, he'd never had anybody on his back, but he didn't make a fuss about it, and he wasn't frightened, because just somehow he knew that Jesus was special and that Jesus would be kind to the donkey, so he had nothing to worry about. So off they all set towards Jerusalem, with Jesus riding on the donkey. Do you remember now, we've heard that wherever Jesus went, crowds and crowds of people wanted to see him. They all crowded round when they knew he was coming, because they knew he would have something to say to them that would help them, or he would make them better. Well, today was no exception with the crowds that came round. The people lined the roads into Jerusalem just to get a peep of Jesus. I wonder if you've been to a carnival or a parade or something special like that, and crowds of people wait on the pavement and they watch and watch and watch until in the end they say, "Here it comes, here it comes." Wow, the people were all watching, waiting to catch a glimpse of Jesus. And as soon as they saw him, they all started shouting and cheering, and they put down their coats on the road for him to walk on, for the donkey to walk on, and they took down branches off the trees and waved those like flags, like you might wave a flag. They waved the branches from the trees, and they called out, "Hosanna, Hosanna," which was like us saying, "Hurrah, hurrah." They were so excited. They were singing praises to Jesus because they knew he was special, like a king, or like like in some countries there's a queen. They thought Jesus was as special as a king. What a happy place Jerusalem was that day. Everybody laughing and cheering and pleased to see Jesus. Well, that was sort of at the beginning of a week. And later on in the week, a bit later on, one evening, Jesus had a very special meal with his disciples. Jesus knew, because he was special, that that would be the last evening he would be on earth with them, with his disciples, his friends, and it would be the last meal that he would have with them. And it was a special time for the Jewish people called the Passover. And for Jewish people today, It's still a very special time, the Passover. It's a time when they celebrate. At the special Passover meal, Jesus and his disciples had a special bread to eat and wine to drink. Everybody drank wine there in those days because the water wasn't very safe to drink. It wasn't as clean as our water is now, and so they all drank wine instead. Then Jesus broke the bread into little pieces. Just remember, like he did when he fed all those people out on the mountain. Broke the bread into pieces, passed it round to his disciples after he'd said, "Thank you for it." And then he passed the wine round to his disciples too, so they all had a sip of wine. But then he said something very special. He told the disciples that every time they did this, every time they met together and had shared bread together and shared wine together, they should remember Jesus and remember that this is what he did. Because this was the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples, we sometimes call it the Last Supper. It was an evening meal, so they called it supper, and it was Jesus' last supper with his disciples. I wonder if that reminds you of anything. I wonder if you remember when we were meeting in church, in the buildings, how sometimes you may have seen mostly the grown-ups, or maybe you've been able to go too, and you've seen people sharing small pieces of bread that the minister gives out to them and having little sips of wine. And we usually now call it Holy Communion. And then when we do that, when we share bread and wine like that, we also remember what Jesus said to his friends at their last meal. And we remember Jesus, and we remember how special he is. We call that Holy Communion. The time Jesus had it with the disciples, we call it the Last Supper. That's something to remember just before we hear the Easter story. Next time we're together, we're going to hear the next bit of the story for the last week that Jesus was on earth here, where everybody could see him and hear him before he went back to his Father in heaven. So, there we are, there's today's story. And remember what I also say to you: be kind to your friends, be kind to your family, look after each other, stay safe. We'll see you again another day. Bye for now. Bye.